What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here with the Stochastic channel. We're talking some college football DFS. It's week 7. We'll be doing the Thursday 3-game slate today. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're brought to you by Bet365, and they have a deal for those of you in Kentucky, Ohio, New Jersey, Virginia, Iowa, Colorado, Louisiana, Indiana, Arizona, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. If I just said your state, you'll click the link below, make your first deposit. Bet $5 in any game, a side or a total, whether it wins or loses. You will get $200 in the form of bonus bets. Must be 21 or older to play, 18 in Kentucky. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Okay, we had a couple showdowns that were pretty fun. I'm actually recording this before the famed Jacksonville State, New Mexico State showdown. We'll see how that goes. But 3 games today on Thursday, I guess tomorrow as I record this, but it should be a fun one. This is a Sun Belt Conference USA slate, so right away don't expect reporting to be any good. Same as the last 2 days where you just straight up don't know if teams are playing. A lot of the beat reporters are working for little itty bitty teeny tiny papers. They're not sending their reporters to away games, as we saw last night with FIU's beat reporter not at the game. So is what it is. You're going to be flying blind on some of these guys, and you have to make some tough choices. Coastal Carolina, James Madison. This is our data usage tool, by the way. It's available at Stochastic along with our projections, ownership projections, sim tool, everything. Everything you need to dominate college football DFS. 9.5-point spread in favor of James Madison in this game, 61 total. This is the best game environment on the slate. Coastal Carolina hits the road. They're slower, 109th in pace, but they have a 38.5% pass rate, which is usable in this contest. They're also explosive in offense. We just saw James Madison get got a little bit by Louisiana Monroe, and their defense has shown cracks. Despite beating North Carolina, they still allowed 9.9 yards per attempt to an absolutely atrocious Jacoby Criswell. I don't know, enough cracks to maybe take some shots on Ethan Vasco, who has very good mobility, already 220 rushing yards this year. He's only taken 3 sacks. And this is a good offensive line. Both these teams actually have very good offensive lines, which should pave the way for some offensive production. Vasco stands out right away at his price. The only problem is his attempts are going to trail behind some of the other mobile signal callers on this slate, particularly Barnett on the other side. However, that's reflected in price. So I think he's completely fine to get to at the 7,100, especially in this game environment. A lot of people are just going to want to flat out click Vasco and Barnett. I have no problem with that. I think they are at least 2 of the top 3 signal callers on this slate. I'd probably rank Vasco 3rd behind Veldkamp for Western Kentucky. We'll get to him, but it's close. So he's certainly in play, one of the top 3 without a doubt. At running back, this is a mess. It's a 4-way committee. You will see Christian Washington, Braden Bennett, Simeon Price, and sometimes they'll involve a 4th back. They haven't been able to lately because of injury. Coastal's dealt with a lot of them. Simpkins is hurt. But at the very least, this should be 3 players in the backfield. And I think you're kind of seeing this exactly the way the snaps went. Price, he had the slight lead in carries. He also had the slight lead in snaps. The biggest difference, Price versus the other backs, is he's on the field way more as a receiver, which is noteworthy because this team needs to, find ways to potentially differentiate among their backs. He doesn't have any targets yet, but in their last game, he was on the field about 30% of the routes. That was nearly tied with Christian Washington. So that might be a potential change to watch in the backfield. It's hard to say. They've been so hurt at running back, their priority is a bit murky. Braden Bennett missed some time. Coming into the season, I thought he would be their running back 1. So yeah, they've been using Price slightly ahead of Washington and Bennett, but according to my priors, coming into the season, I would say Bennett would have been 1. Now you have Washington, with like the best route rate in the year. I think that drops. I would rank him as RB3, but it's dicey. I mean, there's a lot of volatility in the situation, and I very well could be wrong. Price also needs to be considered. Bennett is still priced as the number 1 back in this offense, even though he hasn't played that much. Price also started the year injured as well, so that could explain away some of his slow start. Just things worth mentioning. They're cheap, so you could throw some darts. James Madison has allowed at least 5.5 yards per carry to a single back or a ball carrier, some of them are quarterbacks, to every single team they faced this year. So you can definitely get this team on the ground, even though their full yards per carry is very good. Again, these take sacks into consideration. I'm just talking about removing the sacks. They've allowed over 5.5 yards per carry to opposing ball carriers, at least one of them in every game. This receiving game is an absolute, utter mess. As you can see by the target shares, no one is above 18%. As you can see in the route shares, no one is above 60%. That's Jamison Tucker. He's averaging 3 targets per game and 3.3 over the last 4 contests. This is an absolute disaster. And you look at the routes behind the scenes, this is a complete mess. Coastal Carolina has played a lot of competitive games this year. For reference, Trey Taylor, who leads the team in targets, his highest route share in any game is 57%. Cameron Wright, second on the team in targets, his highest route share is 62%. With Jamison Tucker, you've at least seen a pair of games at 80 and 85, but in their last 2 games, he was at 46 and 61. And he's not even being targeted when he's out there. And that's because they're deep at receiver, as deep as a Sunbelt team can be. Seneca McKee, his routes have been above 40% in 4 straight games. Bryson Graves is between 20 and 30%. Malik Mega, he's been all over the place, but 42, 60, 39 in their most recent games. Even Kyrie Duplessis has been out there at times. They'll use multiple tight ends, and Kane Barron, Kendall Carr, and Zach Courtney. Now they have more backs they can potentially use, and this has been a team that's used multiple backs. I mean, this is just a mess, man. I don't know who you play. The most talented one, I think, is Jamison Tucker. He's too expensive for that, though. I mean, are we really going to play a guy who hasn't seen more than 5 targets in any game this year on this slate? Probably not. Honestly, I would rather just go all the way down and play a guy like Seneca McKee at the Stone Min. But it feels bad. I mean, these are going to be sprinkles that you use. Honestly, the safest play is just play Vasco and then pass. The other side, much more clear. Alonzo Barnett, I think, is the best signal caller on the slate. 296 rushing yards already this year, averages 253 through the air. And that's just because they play much faster and they're pass heavier than Coastal Carolina. His skill set is very similar to Vasco's. They're 31st in pace, 48% pass rate, 48.5. So you're completely fine with Alonzo Barnett. The backfield is pretty much George Pettaway. Barnett does get a fair amount of carries himself. He's seen at least 7 designed runs in the last 4 games, and he's been in double digits in 2 of those. So he's probably the biggest threat to Pettaway, who averages 13 touches per game. Tyler Purdy's the change of pace right now. He's at 5.8 touches per game, and that's because Ayo Adeyi is still injured. Wayne Knight handles a touch here or there. But Coastal Carolina also allowing 5.2 yards per carry to opposing backs. This is a pretty good spot for both run games to get there, which is another reason I like the quarterbacks. They're very involved on the ground. But Pettaway at 5,900 is a pretty solid price tag, even though he doesn't have the same touch ceiling as some of the other backs on this slate. In the receiver room, I think this is getting pretty condensed. Cam Ross, Taylor Thompson, Amarian Dollison, Ymir Knight, they're not rotating that much anymore, especially at receiver. These target shares are finally condensing. Last time out, Thompson and Dollison both 9 targets. Ymir Knight at 6, Cam Ross at 5. Backup tight end Logan Kyle had 3, and otherwise it was just Pettaway at 3. No one else had more than 1. They're not rotating receivers as much as they were early in the season when we saw guys like Tajee Hudson get on the field. They kind of have iced all those guys at this point. In last game, Ross, 83% of the routes. That's been pretty consistent for him. He's been above that mark in 4 of the 5 games. Taylor Thompson at tight end is a little more volatile. He's about 60-ish% of the routes. His high has been 68. Dollison has been above 85% really in every game this year. And then Ymir Knight, while he was a rotational player early on, has worked his way into a full-time role. 83% of the routes and 89%. Kyle, he plays almost whatever's left over from Thompson. So we've seen 20 to 35-ish% of the routes for him. And now that we have kind of solidified this, Dylan Williams, their freshman, he's not playing as much. Breon Penny, no. Tajee Hudson, no. I mean, it's pretty clear here. Ymir Knight is the Stone Man. I don't know why this is the case. For reference, he's averaging 2 full more targets per game than Jamison Tucker at the Stone Man. Likely I'm going to play 2 of these guys. If you made me pick, it would be Cam Ross and then just going all the way down to Ymir Knight. Can't fault you for going to Dollison. He has the most receiving yards. He's up at 60 per game. Or Thompson. He's 3,500. He'll be a little more secure. Actually, I don't even know if that's true. He'll be somewhat secure, a little less secure than Knight now that Knight has moved into this full-time role. This is a very good situation to target. Playing at least one James Madison pass catcher in every lineup, more than likely. Game 2 is the exact opposite. This is our worst game on the slate. It's Middle Tennessee State taking on Louisiana Tech. It's a 5.5-point spread in favor of Tech. This has moved down, actually. I'm seeing some 4.5s now. The total is 49, which isn't great. Middle Tennessee is 101st in pace with a 57% pass rate. Nick Vattiato, negative 17 rushing yards. This is not typically the case for him. But his offensive line is 134th in pass blocking. They have lost 3 starters already this year, and they are dreadful. The only redeeming quality is that they've played some more difficult teams, and now they face the Louisiana Tech defense, which is well outside the top 100. They're only averaging 1.3 sacks per game. So he should be more upright and potentially give you some of that mobility we've seen in previous seasons. He's just volatile because these are really bad teams, man. So you have to kind of balance the good competition they faced. Now they're facing each other. I mean, these are 2 teams that are the bottom of the entire country. So Vattiato is more in GPPs for me because of the significant downside. There is upside as well, which we kind of laid out. They do pass a lot, 57%. He's already at 33 attempts per game for 255 yards. So, I mean, I think he's good for tournaments. The backfield is projected to get a lot more volatile because they've had 2 major injuries. Frank Peason and Jakyle Middlebrook have been out. They're both projected to return this game, which renders this kind of dicey because you have Terry Wilkins and Jaden Credle already splitting the work, and now this projects to be a 4-man committee. And this was nasty when they were all healthy in week 1. Right now, and we have like single-digit snaps separating these guys. We have it projected, just for reference, tentatively to lead this backfield Credle right now, just because he's been healthy and he was at least in a close to 50-50 timeshare with Peasant to start the year. Peasant second, Terry Wilkins third, Jakyle Middlebrook fourth. Lowest, we have Middlebrook projected for 4 carries. Highest, we have Credle projected for 8. I reserve the right to change this as we get information, but this is a much less appealing running back situation than it was before this news came through. At receiver, they did lose Javonte Sherman really early in the season. That's been a pain point for them as well. Just a very, very battered team, which is sad to see. They had some promise in this conference at least. But now you go to the receiving game where things are a little more clear. You just have less options to rotate onto the field. So Middle Tennessee, Amari Kelly, he's at 95+% of the routes. Same with Holden Willis, who is a wide receiver tight end hybrid. Cameron Lacey is the one player who's seen his routes decrease. He's gone from 72% to 38 to 15. And kind of to combat that, Miles Butler's seen his rise up at 74% last game. And then Jamarian Carter has seen a rise in routes in 3 straight games from 28 to 33 to 49. To avoid this rotation, you can focus your attention mainly on Amari Kelly and Holden Willis. Miles Butler's a little more of a stretch, but you could still use him too. He's another stone minimum guy. But I think just very clearly, when you look at the target averages, 8.3 for Amari Kelly, 7.3 for Holden Willis over the last 4 games. No one else higher than 3.8. There's only 4 players above 100 receiving yards, and 2 of them just barely. That's Lacey and Butler, and then Holden Willis is at 314, Kelly at 468. So I think those are pretty easy stacks to get to. I don't really have any qualms with the prices on Willis and Kelly, especially with the stone min guys we talked about. You can get these guys pretty easily. You could even play Butler if you want. I prefer others, but he's there. Louisiana Tech, 33rd in pace, 55.5% pass rate. They made the switch. Evan Bullock is now under center. He doesn't have much mobility, so it seems, but at least he's delivered the ball to his pass catchers with fewer turnovers than Jack Turner and Blake Baker when he was shortly on the field. But, I mean, all the stats are super skewed for this team because they've been messing around with quarterbacks. I wouldn't look at any of the game stuff, the yards per game, the attempts per game. Just look at the 55.5% pass rate, 33rd in pace. Middle Tennessee's defense is atrocious. This is another situation where if Bullock doesn't turn the ball over a ton and get yanked, there is some upside for tournaments just because the volatility in the game. It's 2 bad offenses facing 2 bad defenses. Who wins? Is it the defense or the offense? And we're not sure. So that's worth mentioning. The backfield here is a mess. It's a 4-way committee. Fred Robertson, Marquise Crosby, Omari Wiggins, and Denario Davenport. They all had between 6 and 5 carries in the last game. All of them. How egregious is that and how difficult is it to target? we have this projected, man, and what a mess. So we have it almost razor thin. So we have a half, basically 18.5% of the carries to Robertson, 18% to Davenport, 17.5% to Wiggins, 17% to Crosby. And then 22.5% to Bullock. He's only that high because of the amount of sacks he takes. So kind of giving you a glimpse. None of them are projected more. I mean, we've had one guy at double-digit carries. It was Crosby in the game, actually, which now he's kind of fallen off. But none of these guys average more than 26 rushing yards per game. This is one of the worst rushing attacks in the country, and it's split between too many guys. The receiving game is also a mess, too. The only guy who plays a full route share is True Edwards. He's 5,200. You could definitely use him. 5.5 targets per game, but this has been a mess. Outside of True Edwards, I mean, it's basically like a bunch of players around 50% of the routes, which has got to be very, very tricky for DFS purposes. Jay Wilkerson, he's only been above 40% once. Marlon Jackson, been above it twice. He was at 72.5% in their last game. So he'd be the next guy I would like to gamble on, coming off 8 targets. In that game, Jimmy Holiday was at 40%. Abdul Fattah Ibrahim, 55%. Tight end Eli Finley, 55%. Backup tight end Hunter Tipton, 30%. Dakota Williams, 12.5%. Like Dedrick Lattilis was at 5%. I mean, this is a complete and utter mess. The only player who's been above 70% of the routes in every game is True Edwards. And I mean, we've only had one route share above 70% from any other pass catcher in any individual game all season long, and that was Marley and Jackson in their most recent game. It's either these two or just full pass for me. Marley and Jackson's another Stone Min guy, so I definitely will use him, especially coming off the 8 targets. But this is a tough situation outside of True Edwards. I would not be surprised to see Marley and Jackson drop back down. Luckily, he's the Stone Min. All right, last game, UTEP, Western Kentucky. 19.5 point spread, 57 total. Good pace in this game. UTEP is 13th. Western Kentucky is 30th. They both pass a ton, too. UTEP runs a full air raid. They're 37.5% pass. Western Kentucky, about a 54% pass rate. It's a little lower than normal, but they have a good dual threat signal caller, so it does make some sense. UTEP also made a QB change to Cade McConnell. I have the least interest in him. Although Western Kentucky's pass defense ranks 125th, and they are allowing 9.6 yards to opponents. For reference, they allowed 14.7 yards per attempt to our friend from Middle Tennessee State, Nick Vattiato. Could Cade McConnell get there? I guess. I'm still ranking him dead last in this slate because he has no mobility, takes sacks. He doesn't get a lot of designed attempts. Just a mess, man. Like, the only thing working for him is pace, matchup, and pass rate. So I'm not Xing him out. I definitely play some a little bit, but I think he has the worst path to a ceiling on anyone on this slate. Still there, but it's the worst path. This backfield's a mess. I've said that almost every time now, but so we don't get any reporting on UTEP either. People are speculating Javon Jackson got injured. I think he played like 11 snaps in this game, which was a vast drop for him. Ezel Jolly's only appeared in 2 games this year, but in his second appearance, he had 17 carries. And part of that is because Corey Wren also missed the game, who had been a change of pace back, like a wide receiver hybrid running back for this team. They even had Cam Thomas handle 6 carries in this game as a change of pace back. He's typically a receiver. So, I mean, this backfield is a complete mess. I think Jolly's probably the safest right now just because you might get a DNP from Jackson. We flat out don't know. Jolly, I think, will at least be out there, barring a weird late scratch, which has happened, I guess, for this team. It's not just running back either. So I guess for a team that doesn't really want to throw the ball or doesn't want to run the ball and doesn't throw a ball a lot to their running backs, it's probably a stay away outside of sprinkling for tournaments. For the receiver position, Jaden Smith is out for the year, apparently. He was the late scratch in the last game that some people didn't know about, which is kind of solidified the receiver rotation. Cam Thomas and Kenny Odom basically never leave the field at this point. Kenny Odom has had a vast jump in snaps, so his route share, which is 68% on the season, just know that has kind of blossomed into a full-time route share. He was out there 97% of the routes in week, whatever that was, their last game, 96% the week prior. From there, Trey Goodman, still 75% of the routes. That kind of solidified him. They do run 4 wide a fair amount, and they split that with tight end. So Vincent, 36%, Ezinwa at 22%. That left 50% of the routes for additional receivers. That was mainly Ashton Nickelberry and Amari White. They were both at about 25% apiece. Just a mess. Jolly, 33% route rates. I mean, they're not going to throw to their running backs a ton. They do pass block them here and there. But if we get the news that Jackson's out or something, Jolly would be an awesome play. I'm not anticipating any good reporting here. Western Kentucky, Caden Veldkamp, I think, is the second most consistent play. He only has 42 rushing yards, but we know from previous editions of this Western Kentucky offense, he has mobility. 218 through the air and 27 attempts. Part of these are skewed because Finley started the year and Veldkamp had to come in relief for Finley during a game. So it is what it is. I think he's still a safe play. UTEP is an awful team, and this is a very high implied team total of 38. Nearly 39 points. The backfield is weird to me. LT Sanders is another guy who missed their last game without warning. And this had previously been like a pretty nasty committee. There are games where Jalen Hampton had a fair amount of touches, George Hart, LT Sanders. They sort of been phasing out Hampton, who was 1 carry over the last 2 games, and George Hart, who was 6. And then all those carries that had previously gone to LT Sanders, instead of spreading them out, they just force-fed them all to Elijah Young, who had a 21 carry game and a 5-target game, 16 touches. I can't remember the last time we had a Western Kentucky back touch the ball this many times. He's priced up now, but I mean, UTEP's defense is terrible. They're allowing 5 yards per carry. He's still probably going to pop, even if we get news that Sanders returns. Right now, we have him projected out. I guess you could throw a dart at some of the backups. I don't really like doing that with some of the value we have on the slate, but worth mentioning, the receiving game. Western Kentucky narrowed their receivers a lot too, which I'm very curious to see if this persists, because it was surprising to see, to be honest with you. Right away, we have Keyshawn Johnson, 97% of the routes. He's been above 88% in 4 straight games. Easton Messer, he's been hovering in like the 60% range, which is fine in this offense. Dalvin Smith is the guy that got the big bump. He was at 28%, 24%, and he went to 91% in their last game, and it was not injury-related. They just stuck Musa Berry and Michael Matheson right on the bench, as well as Katie Hutchinson. Matheson's still at a 24% route rate, but we're talking under 5 routes for Musa Berry and Katie Hutchinson. This appears to be sticky, and then other receivers who had previously played at times, Coy Moore, Demick Starling, Bryce Childress, just nowhere to be seen. Some of them didn't even appear in the game. Others are just at minuscule snaps. So it looks like they're going to trot out 3 wide of Keyshawn Johnson, Easton Messer, Dalvin Smith on most occasions, and then rotate other guys here and there. Michael Matheson's probably the favorite, even though he has not crested 30% of the routes yet this year. Last thing, this edition of Western Kentucky is using more tight end than previously. River Helms, 91% of the routes, 84% of the routes last 2 weeks. So it's not the Western Kentucky 4-wide offense we've previously seen. They're using a tight end on every play. You could use River Helms. He's extremely cheap. He's averaging 5 targets per game. It's almost 2 targets better than Jamison Tucker. Is what it is. That'll do it for the slate. If you have any questions, please reach out in the comments or hit me up on Twitter at @Matt_Gajewski. Otherwise, we'll catch you for the Friday slate, and then we'll be back for Maine later in the week. Until then, good luck. We will see you guys later.